Hello, good afternoon, good evening. Please take your seats and let's start the fun. No, guys, we share the fun. We share the fun, so jokes at the microphone, please. Just in time. Okay, so good evening again. I'm Dan Romashcanu.
Adam Montville.
And we are co-chairing this fantastic working group, which is called SACM. So if you have different plans, you can leave now. And if not, here we are. Note well, very important information. We signed for it actually when I registered for this meeting. But if you have any unclarities, please go and read again the documents listed here. If you still have problems, questions, disclosures, talk with us or with the area directors. Admin tasks, blue sheets started to circulate. And now is a moment when everybody jumps and volunteers to be a note taker. We need 2 note takers to start the meeting. 1, thank you. And a second note taker. We don't need detailed notes. We don't need, okay, David, thank you. Okay, so we have 2 note takers. Chris is our Jabber scribe, already logged in. We're ready to go. As you know, we have had in the last like 4 or 5 meetings, 2 meetings this week. Now the gap between the 2 is shorter, so we need to meet this challenge. Today the meeting is 90 minutes. And we'll focus on the already chartered work. And this is the agenda for today. On Thursday morning, we'll continue with the solution space, to which we are actually we plan to dedicate increased time and focus in this working group. And we'll go on also with some homework that we may take today and see what we can solve in the 1 working day interval, which is tomorrow. Any problems, changes to the proposed agenda? Yes, please. New microphone, please.
This is Nancy. So the only correction is I'm going to do the report for both the requirements and the architecture.
Okay, so when we say architecture, we actually say requirements and architecture. It's a it's an alliance. Okay, right. Okay, so the agenda is running. Okay, working group status. The use case document RFC is out. Our milestones, the ones that were read are still read. And we have added a new one, which again reflects that, and we'll probably add a couple of new ones as well very soon, which means that we are still not doing great on milestones. But we have a running proposal actually to possibly park some of the core documents if we get consensus from the working group. We'll discuss this on Thursday. It's a little bit depending on the state of the solution. The proposal is basically what about actually focusing more effort on the solutions and not really pushing hard to finish requirements and architecture. We are kind of split on this still, but we'll discuss it on Thursday. And if we get consensus to do it, we may push ahead for a while requirements and architecture, or maybe only architecture. We'll see how we phrase and what we decide, and if we can get any consensus on this. The architectural requirements have been updated since IETF 93. The terminology draft as well. As you remember, the terminology draft is going to be a living document that will help us all along the process, not necessarily turn it into an RFC, although this may happen, but that's not what we foresee by now. We had one interim meeting in this period. Between now and the next IETF meeting, we have a 5-month gap. Actually, the IETF meeting, IETF 95 is in Buenos Aires first week of April. So we may consider having 2 interim meetings. We'll discuss this as well by the time when we talk about next steps. Comments or discussions about the working group status? Questions? Adam, anything to add? Okay, so requirements and architecture.
Sing in this box. But I have 3 steps. And I
You
can
can
reach the microphone.
almost dance tango.
I can. Well, before, remember, it was like
In Buenos Aires, the squares will be larger. So,
we can do the yeah. Okay. That said, so given the time slot, I just have really just a couple of slides that walk you through. I'm not going to go through every single update. So I want to thank those. Yeah, sorry to disappoint. Next slide. So the first one is to just mention the requirements, because I think that one is like a cool jello now, maybe. So thanks to all of those who provided the comments. I didn't see any on the reflector, so basically it was all of the ones that I found on GitHub. Believe they were resolved, so thanks, Jim, for closing most of them. There's one remaining one, and so I just quoted what is in the current draft, and I listed it as a data model requirement, in part because when I stuck that requirement in, I didn't have an operations section. So I just stuck everything into the data model. And so in reading it, it's basically talking more about the interfaces and the operations that you would do on the data. So Jim correctly pointed out that it really isn't a data model requirement, and that we should move it. So I agree, but I wanted to put it up here. And unless I hear objections, I believe that's, well, not I believe, that's the only comment that I see outstanding on the requirements draft. So I can literally rev it and have another one posted by tomorrow. So,
we can get back to this when we talk about the Architecture Act, but I did a little review of the Architecture Act, and there were a couple of things that struck me that would probably translate into stuff in the requirement, specifically in the Architecture Act. The security requirements only basically talk about security in terms of authentication and authorization, and not in terms of sort of traceability and integrity protection for data. And if we're talking about a set of requirements on a data model, I think it would be a mistake to build this kind of architecture without the ability to detect when you've been owned, when you've to be able to detect when you've been hacked, right? So one of the
Name.
Oh, sorry, Leif Johansson. So, I mean, one of the things that if I build distributed systems like this, which is basically a big command and control system for you know, configuration management, doesn't matter whether it's security or not, right? Then one of the requirements I always try to apply when I build stuff like this is that even if my control boxes or control configuration repositories or whatever gets owned, then I apply signatures judiciously so that I can detect that I've been owned at some point, right? So it's not terribly difficult to do, right? But it actually does require you to have things that look like signatures in the data model. So I just wanted to stand up and say, this might actually be requirements that you have to have in the data model.
Well, so it's a question of whether we discussed this many meetings ago as to whether we could rely solely on the security of the transport layer.
Yes, I guess what I'm saying is that I think that's a huge mistake to do that. It's a massive mistake to do that for a command and control system.
Well, so at this point, I'm going to leave it up to the group because
Right.
we've been going back and forth on it. Your point is well taken, right? Which is why we split the work delineation also between what be stuck in the description as hard requirements versus from an implementation standpoint, the abstraction of how things would flow, right? Which led to the architecture.
Right. I understand that's a very appealing way to split things up, right?
Yep.
I'm just saying that object security has a lot of benefit when you're looking at systems like this, where, you know, especially in the architecture that you're looking at, where, you know, controllers can act as proxies for consumers and endpoints. Yeah. It becomes really, really difficult to detect, to sort of recover from when your control boxes have been owned.
So your point is well taken. We can add requirements, and then within the group, we can debate whether they are must requirements or should requirements. Fair? But I would like to see it because my brain, especially this week, has a very to zero cache.
Right. I just reviewed the architecture draft like literally this morning because I didn't have anything else to do. And
I appreciate it, by the way.
I went, whoa, would I like deploy something like this in my network?
Your point is very well taken. So I guess the question, Leif, is, and to the group, should I wait for those comments? Can I rev based on the last outstanding GitHub?
Lucy Lynch, NSRC, and I made the comments the last time on privacy, and I actually asked Leif and several other people to look at this document, and I would say, yes, please wait.
Read the
One
document,
moment.
publish it, but we don't.
Just one moment. We should wait, Lucy, we should wait because you know that there are reviews in preparation, incoming.
I'm in favor of revising as often as possible. Right? Certainly don't wait on revision, right?
Okay. I mean, it's really up to you guys, the chairs, to determine at which point.
No. It's up to us, but we need to make an educated choice before throwing the dice or the coin. Choose what coin to throw.
I don't mind making as many revisions as needed, but I guess part of our challenge has been getting...
I'm trying to kind of understand if there are reviews incoming, if there is any, and of course taking all the caution because everything is volunteer work and people are busy and so on. But is there an expected time for those reviews to come?
Kathleen with 80 hat off says she thinks that object signing is a good, or object security is a good thing. So she's in favor.
But I need more meat. I can't just add a requirement. And yeah, so I'm putting the action on Leaf as opposed to me trying to.
No, I understand. She's in favor. She's got a thumbs up on.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me put it like this. Let's try to put some kind of milestone for requirements and rev to make sure that I don't know, we don't slide with the new rev, I don't know, in 2016.
Well, like I said, I can put another one by the end of this week.
Yes.
But I cannot answer issues unless.
Okay, so we had a
So-
request to wait, and we did not.
Well, we have one
I'm just
request.
promising to do a review. I gave you heads up on some issues that I think I'm gonna raise, and you know, revise 100 times between me and then doesn't matter.
Okay. Let's wait one more week. And
Okay, so that puts me out to December, just FYI.
that puts you out to December. So one more week means December.
Yes. Because I'm traveling 2 weeks after that.
You are traveling for the last weeks of December, of November.
Yeah,
So before and after Thanksgiving,
well,
more or less.
yeah,
Okay.
more or less.
Okay. So do a revision before you get on that plane.
So can that be captured in
Yes.
future documents potentially?
Yeah, it's feature refs of the same document.
Well, I mean, does it have to be captured in, I mean, so well, I'm shortcutting the process of the working group, but we can put it in data model.
But
Assuming
I
we
can
actually
move
get that.
this. What I said was I can make this change, and it's just going to take me a while, right? Which is this week. But what I heard from Lucy and Leaf is that more comments are coming. So Leaf has said, it's okay, I can put another revision, I don't have to wait. But I think Lucy was suggesting that I wait. No? No? Okay.
Brian Haberman as stand-in area director for Kathleen. Yeah, so the reviews can come in last call. There's no problem with that. And there's no reason to hold up on it.
Okay, so I'll try and crack something out this week,
Okay,
and then
so-
we'll wait.
Get this week done. Unless we hear strong opinions, we'll issue a last call. We'll give the last call because it's last week. We give the last call 3 weeks, take into account Thanksgiving in the middle, and comments will come in hopefully against the last call.
Okay. That was the easy one, okay?
That
And-
was supposed to be the easy one.
It was supposed to be the easy one, and I only have 2 slides for the architecture. So I am presuming in the interest of time, I did not provide an overview of the architecture. So I just wanted to get into the heart of the issues. So next,
Okay, so next steps, actually, we went through this discussion. Okay, so you are asking a question.
yeah, but we discussed
I guess
already.
that comments can be made against the
last
working group
call.
last call
Yep.
as well, and that's fine.
Okay.
So we don't need to wait. So let me put it like this. If anybody feels strongly that we should not go to last call, please express this now or in the working group mail list, okay? Maybe
So
now.
So here is where I actually plan to get up, right? And there are many things about this, the architecture, that feels like a little bit scary to me, right? I mean, one of the things that struck me, I'm and try to read here from the security consideration section, right? It says,
One moment. We are not talking about the architecture document right now. We're
oh,
talking
sorry.
about-
I thought you were.
We're still
No, no,
trying
we're
to
talking
close
about
the
the
requirements.
requirement. Okay.
That's why I said I was trying to finish the easy one, Leaf.
We are trying to finish the requirements document, the shorter requirements document. The architecture document comes now.
Okay. So I didn't provide an overview, Leaf, so, but it's good that we have fresh eyes reviewing it, by the way, right? So again, I didn't see any issues posted on the mail list. So I just addressed the ones that were on GitHub, except for, David, you posted some on the mail list today, which they seemed inane enough that I can try, but I think I can't rev the architecture draft yet because of some of the issues that even I have on it. There's still a lot of TBD stuff in there. But this just talks about the general logistics. So there were, I forget, 30, anyway, there were a lot of comments that we went through. So thanks for the participants who joined the calls to help work through those issues. So I managed to go through all of them, but I don't know, Jim, if you left them still open because, so I need more guidance, right? Because I said, okay, I'm going to address it. I addressed them, but I couldn't tell. So that's why I said, okay, 10 of them still show as issues. So I couldn't tell. So that's why I was going to take an action to go through them with you, Jim, and understand, because I know a couple of them still need more updates. I think you listed one, but I need more feedback as to what to do with the others. Did you have a question?
Yeah, Nancy, this is Dave. I wanted to get those comments in before the working group meeting, but my plan was to post the same comments to GitHub and also propose some text to
Awesome.
update those.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you weren't going to do them, I was going to put them on GitHub.
So is there any kind of homework, maybe instead of putting GitHub, maybe getting together tomorrow and try to do an editing session?
Maybe. I have to look at my schedule.
You are both in the same city.
Yes, but we may have other commitments.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can try. But I mean, like I said, for my own bookkeeping, right?
I'm kind of trying to find out if possible to spend a few hours tomorrow, which is the only day between the first and the second meeting, and try to solve this kind of
agree.
issue instead of
Right. My
going
only
via GitHub.
logistical request is Nancy's memory cache is almost zero. And so because I know I cannot churn a new version of the architecture draft by this week, I need to log it as an action item. And so I don't mind, right? Although I've now gotten used to just going to a central place, which is the GitHub issues, right? And so I was just going to post them, but we can get together and just post it on the GitHub issues and put the resolution in there as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Sound okay?
Yeah.
And, if others have comments, so as I suspect Leaf will, based on what he was saying earlier.
I mean, I won't do them now, right? But I will
Yeah.
do them in writing, right? But
Right.
I mean, I just want to explain what made me get up during your slide deck on
The requirements,
right.
sure.
And that was this sort of text, and this is not the only thing that jumped out at me when I read this architecture, but the one that has to do with object security is consumers and providers that consume or publish information without requiring, sorry, that's not it at all. Yeah, I was looking at the wrong part. So it's presumed that once authenticated and authorized, the provider, controller, or consumer is deemed trustworthy. Although note that it is possible that the modules or devices hosting the SACM components may be compromised as well due to malware tampering. However, addressing that level of trustworthiness is out of scope for SACM. And this is where I sort of take that makes me really uncomfortable, right? You're building essentially a command and control network that, you know, in some part reads as the IETF specification for a botnet, right? And you're sort of trying to hand wave at the problem of recovering from having your control boxes hacked.
Well,
that to me is.
So to be clear, right?
That's being not ambitious enough is what I want to say.
Okay. So would love to get that feedback in writing so I remember how
Right.
to
And I
write,
will.
because I wrote, so I think that was in the security considerations
It was,
section.
right.
Right.
It was.
Which I wrote. And so the intent there, and I believe the group agreed, is that there are already authentication schemes.
Yes.
And
You're right about that. What I'm saying is that authentication isn't good enough for something this
which is why
important.
I think I put language about authorization. But then from our charter perspective is how do we go about, now you're talking about building levels of trustworthiness that go beyond the authorization, which
Yes.
I believed was not in scope for SACM to figure out how to solve.
Right.
How do you establish trust between two endpoints?
And well, it's not, that translates, well, you can translate that into a key management problem. That's not it,
No,
right?
I'm not saying it's a key management problem, right? I think there
Right.
may be different ways in which you can solve that.
Right.
And I don't think it's black and white when we say we must secure them, because there are different ways in which we could secure them.
That's right. But what I'm talking about here is a layering issue, right? I think what I take objection to as somebody who might deploy something like this is that there is a authentication and authorization layer that acts as a gateway to operations that you can perform. And once you're inside the firewall, right, you're allowed to do what once you're inside the policy decision point, you're allowed to do whatever you're allowed to do, right? And I think treating this sort of configuration management like that, I think is a mistake. And I think that if you look at when people do deploy large-scale config management, it's actually not uncommon to deploy signature-based authentication, object security, because you then have the ability to recover from being owned, right? You can figure out at what point your control box, got hacked, and exactly what changes to your Git repository were bad, right?
So now you're talking about the secure configuration of the SACM system.
Which this is.
Okay, so
right, and
if you
that should
can
go
provide that
into the
feedback,
security.
I can try it, not
Right.
try. I mean,
Right. But
So-
I want to explain where I'm coming from in sort
Fair.
of pushing back on the requirements bits, right? Because if you're going to do something like that, that's a pretty fundamental set of extra requirements on the information model, because now you actually have to carry a lot around security, related material in your objects, as opposed to just having an authentication barrier, right?
I can only speak for myself, right? Which gets to the levels of complexity and what we approach here
Right.
versus what we can leverage, right, from other areas.
And I mean, there are these solutions like that, and the systems like that have been deployed and are being deployed, right? All over the place. So complexity is obviously not an obstacle. Well, not enough an obstacle anyway. But okay, I'll shut up now and write it down.
Boy, it's a good thing I kept my deck to like 4 or 5 slides. No, this is good, by the way. I mean, getting comments is the only way we can make progress, right?
Okay, so Lisa, I guess Jabber's focused on the last question on your slide. So is a NIA client a SACM collector or an internal provider?
So Lisa's commenting, yeah?
Yeah, so Lisa, I propose that a NIA client could be either a provider if it publishes information directly, or a collector if it doesn't, e.g. information is collected from it and published by the NIA server, which is environment dependent. And then Jessica comments, this issue may be more easily resolved if we up-level the question and work on integrating the role of the endpoint into the architecture. Since the endpoint endpoint could be a target of evaluation or the provider of information or both. Sorting out where it fits in the architecture might help us figure out where internal collectors belong.
Okay, so this intertwines with the terminology that Hank and I were discussing, right? Because in the terminology, we left the definition, and I think there are explicit terms for a collector and then subterms, I'm looking at Hank, subterms for internal versus external collector. Right.
This is Hank. Actually, the terminology document draft now includes two definitions that a little bit contradict themselves. This is on purpose in order to resolve this. The collection task includes three types of, and this is the self-reported and the remote and the other ones. And then there is now an ongoing definition that is the collector, that is at the moment, in order to visualize this gap or this discrepancy, not a second component. In order to take up on this.
Yeah, I think you had a question in there. Right, so to Lisa's point, it is implementation dependent. So this question came up when we were going through the architecture issues. And I forget, maybe it was Jessica, somebody was asking, you know, what is NIA client? And I think what we're trying to say is it depends on how a NIA client is being implemented, especially now as we define SACM. In the implementations that I know of a NIA client today, they are only producers of a result. Well, they are producers of information, but stored internally, meaning that they don't, depending on how they implement the client, they may not necessarily even be a SACM component. The question that I'm posing here is, to me, this is going further away from the architecture, more into the actual details of how we might go about implementing a use case. And so the question was good. It needed to be answered. I think we are discussing it, and, you know, it's more of, do we need more discussion? Is that sufficient? Or is there something that we need to do in the architecture? As an author of the architecture, I don't think so. I think it's more of how we do the clarification of the terms, but I needed to pose it to the group. What? Oh.
So this is Hank speaking again. From my personal point of view, this apparently, of course, needs consensus, has to be on the list. And my personal opinion here, not as an editor, is that we should not inhibit a collector to be a SACM component, but acknowledge this use case, apparently.
You still haven't answered my question. I don't want to put that into the architecture draft. It's more a question of the terminology.
Okay, then I will raise this question.
Huh?
Then I will raise this question as a terminology question. No problem.
Well, no, okay.
Sorry.
So no changes on the architecture.
No, no changes.
That's what I was asking. Thank you. Okay, so
So Lisa says she strongly disagrees.
Oh.
And Jessica says me too. Sorry.
And Lucy Lynch, clarifying question: if a box can potentially hold a dual role and hold it either concurrently or on separate streams, how does that not go into the architecture document?
Well, so Lucy, I think you're asking about the physical box. I would talk about it in terms of in the implementation of the functionality of.
I'm talking about the roles. So
roles of SACM.
Jim Schuck, the architecture allows a single component to have multiple roles, so it can be both a collector and a provider. This is the issue of, can there be collectors which are not in some respect, SACM components.
So Lisa says, this is an architectural question, and I think we should include explicit language that a NIA client could be either or, since it seems this is not clear. And to Jim's point, yes, collectors do not need, collectors do not need to be providers directly.
So the question then, because I was going to raise a question in my next slide, which is we have a section in the architecture that talks about the different examples of, I don't want to use the word roles because roles in SACM is more about a provider, a consumer, a controller, okay? What we're really talking about is specific functions within a workflow, okay? So within a workflow, you might have a NIA client. There were questions about how we map this functionality. So in the architecture, we added a section, which to me felt redundant, but I'm hearing my co-author disagree. Because effectively, when I was reading the section on the components examples, even there, we were defining what a collector is, what an internal collector is, what an external collector is. And that's what led me to some of the discussions with Hank about consistency and whether they should be merged into only one place where we describe what they are.
This is Dave Waltermeyer. I think the terminology really matters a lot here. You know, being crisp in what we actually are talking about.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying today,
right,
we have definitions for what a collector is in the architecture, and we have a definition in the terminology. I believe it belongs in the terminology.
right.
It's up to the group.
The definition itself belongs in the terminology. The behavior and the interfaces
It's architecture.
is architecture.
Yeah.
So Lisa, and so back to Jim's point, yes, collectors do not need to be, so I screwed this up, this is JabberScribe problem. Yes, collectors do not need to be providers directly, in many cases would not be for scale. And then follow up, that seems like a great place to handle it. Provide a brief example of a NIA client as provider and an example of NIA server as provider, but NIA client is not. Wait, did I read that right?
Okay, so my suggestion is, Hank, you and I should sit and work through, section 313 of the architecture, because a lot of those to me felt like terminology, at least as is written now. And so we need to make the separation of content in one versus the other.
So we should sit is like we shall sit tomorrow.
You know, I do have sessions to attend and reports to write for the IETF.
Okay.
But yes, I mean, to the extent that I
can take
I'm
no
gonna,
as an answer.
no.
I was just going to add on this discussion, this is still Dave, that if there's a desire to have an example within the working group, I don't see any reason not to include an example. But specifically as far as what ends up being implemented or required, it sounds to me like this is really just about a solution, defining a solution at the end of the day, right? And that solution should say, I'm a NIA, for a NIA client as a solution, then it maps to this function within the architecture.
So,
and that's where it really matters, right?
many months ago, sections were added to show examples. Most of those sections are still TBD. Unless people help me provide text, I don't know how to move forward. Because I don't understand what was placed in section 7, for example. I don't understand that workflow. Okay? Component capabilities is completely blank. Somebody had volunteered, I don't remember who it was. We never got text. Okay. Section 313 has single sentence descriptions, which are more to me definitions. So I understand, I'm trying to move this forward, but you know, we keep asking for volunteers and I don't know how to move forward.
We don't in the meantime. Yeah, Chris.
So from Lisa, the formal definition can be in terminology, but the architecture must contain enough definition to be readable as a standalone document. Separate. At the time, we agreed to hold off on examples until the architecture stabilized. And then separately, Jessica says she can help with examples.
Okay, so we have a history track and we have a volunteer to help with examples. So maybe there is some progress.
Okay. Thank you, Jess.
Okay, so just please record this. And let's see what's left here.
So this draft has a lot of work still left to be done. And Leif, I'm going to presume that you're going to provide us comments too, based on your readings and findings. And so this one will take some time.
Okay, so no danger of this going to working group last call soon.
Yeah, not ready. That's it.
Thank you. Danny.
All right. Danny, I'm going to go over the information model update. So basically today, take the same format we did. Oh, can you? Yeah. That better? All right. So a similar format that we did to the virtual interim meeting, do a quick status update and then go through some issues and talk about next steps. Oh, I guess, okay, that didn't come out as good. So during the virtual interim meeting, we went over the various changes I had incorporated into GitHub, basically all around kind of the structure of the information model to provide more of a kind of easy to work with framework to be able to essentially create new objects as we decide we need to define them. So those changes are all on GitHub. I think I still need to actually make an update so the document's up on the IETF site, but I'll do that. I got to figure out how to do that, I guess. Beyond that, so far we've only closed a couple issues, and that was basically the first one was basically getting those changes in there, and the other one was changing the milestone for the informational model to be a standards track document rather than an informational track document. So then beyond that, there's a couple that are still open, so we got to work on those. The one kind of interesting thing that came out of the virtual interim meeting was, I think it was Sharif Mansour. He had requested kind of a list of tasks and descriptions of different areas where people could help out and to kind of maybe help people get more involved. So we took a stab at that. I think we need to maybe discuss it a little bit more, and we'll discuss it later. But we'll see if that helps out. So as far as, I guess beyond that, there's that triples example we were working, that Hank was primarily driving there. And basically what happened with that is, in thinking about it some more, rather than maybe kind of providing an example to use triples for the group to use, basically maybe what we really need is just a set of requirements that can maybe allow triples and some other possible representation in the data model. Yeah.
Quick question. Why can't this be a Yang model?
I don't think it can't necessarily be one.
Why?
No, I'm agreeing.
Oh, you're saying it could?
You could, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think it should. I mean, there's stuff you could reuse probably from standard Yang information model documents. Things like IP.
So first of all, Yang is a data model
There are things that
language.
correspond. There are commonly used elements in Yang. Things like IP address and things like that. You can definitely reuse. NetConf uses this, right? They have the same primitives, right?
So Jim, what was your question?
My understanding, especially after having gone to the introductory talk on Sunday, is that Yang is very much a data model, and that they object.
I was making the same.
And they object when you use it as an information model.
Right.
Chris Ignacio, Carnegie Mellon. So actually, there are just some recent updates to Yang. So in a chat with Benoit, that some of the language about Yang has been expanded in order to be used that way, so that you can do more, kind of information modeling. The biggest problem with kind of looking at Yang right now is mapping some of the kind of more protocol specific features that are in Yang. So what does it mean if you put in something that says something like feature optional oval? So Yang has something where you can actually specify, send me back any XML document in it. And if you want to make it optional within Yang and wrote the Yang model to say something to the effect of feature optional support for oval as a evaluation result, what does that really mean if you're using that as a data model or an information to describe the information model to have the protocol impact, especially since we don't exactly have a protocol or understand what it means to go to transport mapping. And, so you can use Yang that way, but there are gaps in understanding if you do it.
Right, but I mean, I guess my point is you might not need to build a protocol around it because you have NetConf, right?
So I don't think you can do SACM with NetConf, but I think.
You're not suggesting.
Why?
NetConf. No, come on, Leaf. No, because we're not network centric. Okay.
No, seriously, I've seen deployments on NetConf that have nothing to do with network provisioning, right?
So this is where. Oh, sorry. I'm Nancy. So with respect to Yang and all of this, where I came to the conclusion is what we're trying to do in SACM is to build an abstract model, which we're calling an information model. How we represent the model, to me, is secondary. And that's where I believe Yang can be it. Yang is a tool that can allow us to define the abstractions. It has the good is a relative term. It's got a foundation of core objects, I will say, for lack of a better term, that we can leverage without us having to start from ground up. My point is that the information model needs to be the data representation that we in SACM all agree with, so that when other data models come in as proposals, we have something to point to and say, aha, it does fit the SACM model. So I'm going to leave it as just SACM model, and how we represent it is up to the proposals. Yeah, I like a thick turtle. Yeah.
So Dan Romashkano, I feel so funny because now I need to sit. I felt that I needed to do it behind the contributor's microphone. And I feel funny because I'm probably the first time in my life that I'm actually trying to tell people don't do NetConf and Yang, because maybe it's not the right tool. So people who know my history know why I feel funny. But really, there are many reasons for which even the discussion about whether NetConf is the right protocol for SACM is too early. And there are many reasons for which Yang as a data modeling language does not really fit or seems not to fit here. One of them is that if I put against like 8 or 10 requirements that we have for data modeling in the requirements document today, I will actually will get to the conclusion that it's like a failing, like at least of 5 of them or such. Yang is a data modeling language. It comes with its constraints. It is not necessarily network or network devices oriented. It can do much more indeed, and starts to be used for doing much more indeed. But it doesn't have the level of abstraction of defining the information that is required for an information model. So taking a decision to use Yang to represent the IM at this point in time, I believe, would actually live into constraints that are much out of our requirement space. Opinion as a contributor.
Dan, can you actually send why you think that, the issues that you envision to the list?
I will do. Yeah.
Yeah, and a little bit later on, we have a few examples of Dave Maltemeyer proposed a few examples of ways we can represent the different elements in the information model. And Joe Wolfkill also presented a couple on the list. So I kind of put together examples and we can kind of look at them and see if any of those maybe work. And then lastly, out of the last endpoint identity design team meeting, there's this kind of idea of creating a matching algorithm for when you're looking at different attributes associated with an endpoint. How do you match them to, say, look at the data collected by 2 sensors and see that they're actually talking about that same endpoint? That's kind of still an ongoing discussion, and definitely follow it on the list. If you have any thoughts, please let us know. So yeah, we can get to the next slide. Okay, so as I just mentioned, this is something we have to figure out. I think it's kind of the last piece before we can kind of go ahead and put together a couple examples, and then if we decide to kind of park these documents, as Dan mentioned, I think we'd be in a good spot. Do you have something, Chris?
So I don't think we're at 73,000 yet.
Yeah, no, that's the ending 3 is supposed to be a kind of a subscript or superscript reference. I guess converting to PDF doesn't like that. So basically the 3 or the 4 approaches given where that RFC 7326 was like the energy management framework. The LMAP information model is basically large measurements or large scale measurements platform. And then UML and entity relationship diagrams were also proposed. So kind of as we go through the different examples, just kind of think of, whether or not you like the ones you see, and if there's other things we should look at, let's put them on the list so we can take a look. Next slide. So the first one we have on the left is the one used in RFC 7326. It looks a lot like if you're defining a class in some type of modern programming language. You have the class, it extends another class. You have a couple different attributes and their data types, and then maybe some information about what each of those are. Kind of similarly for the LMAP information model, it's a little bit different. It looks more like a structure in C. I personally kind of like the one on the left. And I guess the one thing to note, because there is kind of an active discussion going on the list about whether or not a network interface is a hardware component, software component, or something else. This is just an example, so don't beat me up about it. And then I guess we go to the next slide. So then I went ahead and tried to create some ASCII art versions of a UML diagram for these same structures, as well as a entity relationship diagram, which I actually didn't even know existed until I someone mentioned it. So, I mean, these look nice. Personally, they just seem like a lot of maintenance, and for something that we intend to, we'll have to expand over time as different endpoints and the information we need to collect changes. It seems kind of like a lot of maintenance, and maybe we'd be better off just going with something that's not based off of a diagram. So, I mean, with that said, does anyone have any initial thoughts on kind of an approach they like or something they don't like? What do you mean by a comparison? Oh, okay. Yeah, it might be better. I'll send the slides to the list that aren't, they might be easier to look at. Okay, so I guess.
Do you have a preference?
Do I have a preference? Yeah, I have, the one I like is that first one on the left.
This one?
Yeah, that's the one I like.
What is 7326? What, like, working group or what?
It's the energy management framework. I'm not sure what the working group is. Dave had proposed it.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not certain it really matters though, really.
Yeah, no, I was just curious what.
For what it's worth, I like the left example as well.
Okay, cool.
Energy management framework.
All right. So as I mentioned earlier, at the last virtual intern meeting, we had a request for basically some task descriptions. So at the last endpoint identity design team meeting, we put together a few with brief descriptions and kind of the skill sets. And really the idea there is to maybe make it more accessible for people to help out. So if maybe someone that's lurking on the list, they can say, oh, hey, I'm a developer, I can maybe help out here. And basically, the different tasks that we came up with. So the first one is trying to get someone to, so in the information model, there's a lot of different attributes about an endpoint that we may want to collect. What we need is a really good starting point, and maybe the easiest way and kind of the lowest lift would be if someone could put together a survey with, what we think is a good set and see what people have to, think about which ones are the highest priority for them. And maybe from that, we can get a good starting point for how to populate our information model and then move forward. It seems like because not everyone can attend meetings and be part of the discussion. So it just seems like this might be a good way to get things started. Kind of to that point, once you have that list, assuming you have it, you're gonna need some people to really kind of look at those different things and define the different models that SACM needs, whether it be a network interface, maybe a processor or something like that. So we're going to need people to look at that, and maybe based on, maybe a developer might be a good pick for that with kind of their object-oriented background and things like that. And so there's some other ones there. They're on the list. You can take a look at them. I guess the big question I had here is, are there other ones that we want to consider? Do people think this would be a useful thing to do, or maybe it's, does someone not, does this seem like a not a good use of time?
So, Chris Ignacio, so I think this is not a bad thing to do. So I have a fundamental question about people who actually are already collecting large piles of this data, which is how do they deal with it? So, so if you're doing entity relationship, right, that's really comes out of kind of the database world and how to structure relational models versus, UML, which is, well, it's kind of all things to all people in all of its various guises. Down to kind of what you said was the more simple model, which seems very task specific in a way.
Yeah.
And, I think from some amount of kind of the developer question, there's a bit of a developer question in my mind that would be up front, which is, after you collect a large collection, do you operate it on it relationally? Do you, how do you act on the data after you do collections? So there's two pieces. I mean, right? So you want to do this in a transport, right? So we're interested more in the transport, not describing the database side. But if you have some understanding of key fields that might matter in the future, that might help. And then the second part that comes to my mind of how to do a data model versus the information model is, how do you build it for the right set of extensibility for the use cases that we envision in implementations?
I'm not sure I guess I understand from a perspective of different tasks that we're trying to kind of document for people to do.
It's not clear to me that you don't want a developer, hopefully one who's already been involved in fielding products related to this, to be a little more involved in some of the other areas earlier,
Yeah, I mean,
to know what the pitfalls are of mandatory to implement, to know that the basis, the core pieces of the information model have to at least be these set of things. Otherwise, we run into a fail later on.
Okay, yeah, I get it now.
So I guess in the context of this, right, abstraction layers are fine, right? But they also add obstacles to people actually coming in and reviewing and understanding what you're doing, right? So yeah, you could be doing a great information model, but I guess that you could sort of reinterpret what I was saying about Yang in terms of, well, if you create something in terms that people are comfortable seeing, you might actually get more eyes on it.
Yep, no, that makes sense. And I guess more to Chris's point, yeah, the developer perspective was more like once we have something, we're going to need people to create some running code. But yeah, ideally, I think a developer could be well suited in quite a few of these different tasks. Do we have any other comments or questions on this? Okay, I guess we'll just go to the next slide. So this is when we started discussing at the virtual intro meeting, and we kind of ran out of time. And basically, there's an open question in the information model asking whether or not reports, oh, do you have something? Oh, just walking. Whether or not reports were out of scope. And basically what a report is, as currently defined in the information model, is basically you may do some reading bunch of data about different endpoints, maybe across an enterprise, and manipulating that data and creating a what might be a nice human readable report versus maybe a bunch of data in some type of standardized format that you might see that's represented as a kind of a raw assessment result. And so the big question kind of is with organizations and kind of the reports that they need, because of they're all different and care about different things. I think reports would be, we'd have to support a very broad, I guess, standard and to cover everyone's needs. And I don't know that, I don't know, I think a lot of people would find a lot of things lacking. So it just seems like maybe the better thing is just to focus on giving them the assessment results and the data that they need, and allow them in their own, I guess, essentially proprietary way to provide the reports that they care about and that are useful to them.
This is Dave Waltermeyer. I'm in favor of actually punting on this issue because, like you're saying, different organizations might have slightly different requirements for what reports they need. I think it's important to acknowledge that reporting is an important output of a potential SACM component, but defining the specifics of a given report seems like it's kind of a low priority item right now. What we really need to focus on is how we get the data, how we evaluate the data that will ultimately go into a report, because if we can't standardize and expose the information that ultimately goes into a report, it seems like the exercise is, futile from that
Right.
perspective.
Sorry, Adam. So in the charter, we have that we have to report results, but I don't think that means reports in the business sense. I think it's produce the results.
Yeah, so I think there maybe the kind of part of the discussion from the last virtual interim meeting, I think there might have been some kind of confusion there.
Right,
so, yeah.
right. So I think the scope of what we need to worry about is providing the results that would later be used for business level reporting.
Yeah.
Just the results, though. We don't have to worry about interpreting that for some reason.
Yeah, I like that idea. Did anyone else have any thoughts on that or opinions?
I believe that the answer is that according to the charter, that layer of report is out of scope for the first, at least for the first phase of SACM.
Sounds good. And I'll follow up on the list to allow people to make other, if they have any thoughts on it. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. So another issue was, so kind of getting to, in the information model, just going through cleanup and addressing some additional open comments. There is some text around various SACM components, specifically the external collector, evaluator, and report generator. And to me, it just seems kind of out of place, because I think in the information model, we just want to be able to describe the data that we care about and maybe move this stuff into the architecture if it's not already covered. And I think, I'll leave it to the editors of the architecture document to, I'll send the text around and we can see if it makes sense to pull it in, or maybe we just drop it all together, because the architecture, I think, has come a long way since this comment was made. Did anyone have any thoughts on that or any objections? Okay. So in the last issue, this is another one we didn't get to discuss at the last virtual interim meeting. Basically, there was a request that SACM must report time synchronization. Basically, that's very important when you get into to being able to do things like correlating events and kind of, looking at the different data and seeing what happened when, and, sometimes, things are collected off the endpoint, sometimes they're observed, and there's kind of a chain in which these things happen. So having these timestamps is important. And that kind of gets into, there's a little discussion on the list, or I think it's actually technically GitHub, but I think that works too, because they go out to the list. And basically, out of that whole discussion, there was basically just some proposed text to include these two requirements for data models in the requirements document. Basically just saying that when a SACM component, on the target endpoint, basically it should implement the time sync and addressing the correct timestamps. I think that's a should, and Hank, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's a should, because at the end of the day, it's happening on the endpoint, and you kind of have a reference point there.
Hi, this is Hank. Yeah, making this a must is a little bit of complicated, because a SACM component would force then time synchronization on a endpoint, and I think that's pretty much not doable in practice.
Okay.
Dave Woltermeyer, I just wanted to point out the requirements document, OP 001 says requests and response operations must be time-stamped, and published information should capture time of publication, which I think reflects.
So I guess that the last, we're kind of mixing here, I believe, two levels of discussion. So the last two bullets look like comments to the requirements document, but actually I believe that we have time stamping already in the requirements. Now, from the information model, if the question is from the information model, in order to meet the requirement, do we need timestamps to be part of associated with operations to be part of the information model, that's a question for the IM discussion. But we need to separate those two.
I think the requirements document, though, somewhat confuses that because it's in section 2.5, which is requirements for data model operation. So in itself, it's kind of defining information model requirements, or at least requirements on data models.
So it's on data model operation because actually this is a level where timestamping happens, right?
Yeah, I think the whole reason it came up is because at some point when we're getting this data and we're producing content, I guess, in our data model.
Yeah, data model operation. Yeah. So the data, you're timestamping. So the act of timestamping to me is an operation.
Yeah, but it does say published information should capture time of publication, which sounds to me like an information model requirement, right?
Well, it's not a requirement of the information model. You may have elements.
It's still transactional.
You may have information, yes, you may have information elements.
When you receive it, right, it's an action that occurred on the data. It's not the data itself.
Right. So now if
both are operations.
If there is a timestamp element that needs to measure time from initialization or time from starting of collection, that's a different issue. So this may be an information element.
Okay. Maybe what we should do is just talk about it more on the list and try to iron that out. Because I know, I believe Ira brought it up and he's not here right now.
So to appease Dave to your comment, right, with respect to how we model things, and again, it's a model. So thank you for pointing that out.
Can you guys hear me? This is Lisa.
So the information.
Hello.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, sorry, I was.
So there.
Keep going.
Sorry,
Lisa.
there seems to be horrific lag. I was trying to respond on the chat and it has not shown up for 60 seconds. I think one problem is that there's a question of timestamp for operations, which is transient, but we need to associate the time of collection and possibly the time of generation with the attribute itself, and that becomes metadata about the attribute. So I think Dan's point was good, that there are two different levels of timestamp here, and the requirements primarily focuses on the first level.
Right. So in the notion, so Lisa, thanks, that's what I was trying to say. So the notion is in the information model, there's the data itself, but then you can attach metadata that includes potentially some of the operations, or what I'm describing in the requirements is operations.
So you have your instructions?
Yes, I think so.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we can just go to the next slide. So basically out of this, I'm going to take the different issues and kind of get the different discussion points out there. And if there's something we can act on, then we'll try to work to resolve that and get other people's opinions. I guess from my perspective, my biggest priority is getting a kind of a representation for the information model. Because I think once we have that, you know, if the working group gets to a point where we want to park these documents, that puts us in a good place to do that. Because then we should be able to pick it up and start, you know, kind of defining these different objects that we want to model and kind of move from there. And then basically, other than that, you know, we have to continue to kind of discuss the triple examples and kind of some of the new ideas around that, and kind of finish up this algorithms list and thread and see where it goes. Right now, we haven't really talked about algorithms so much in the working group, so I think it'll be an interesting discussion. And then Dan already kind of talked about the path forward and how we'll talk about that Thursday. So I don't really have much to say there. So that's it.
Okay, so we'll take some of those in the password discussion on Thursday, but I believe that we got a good assessment about where we are. Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Henk, you are standing between us and the social.
Hi, Hank. I'm just heating. Okay. Hi, I am Hank. Dang it.
Hi, Hank.
Hi, Hank. Yeah, I Hank. I tried that. Whatever. Hi, Hank. So again. And yeah, I'm going a quick run through the terminology updates and added items. Basically, I included the changelog in the slides. So, and then a few words about next steps. I have about 10 minutes for this. So there are a bunch of added terms that are basically, and I will fetch this. Okay, this is better. There are a bunch of new terms in the terminology draft. Basically, there is one term, and that's why it's on the top of the list, that is not actually adapted by drafts at the moment, and that is the term SACM domain. This will be, if SACM is instanced somewhere with data models and protocols and running code, then it will form something that we now call a SACM domain, which is probably an appropriate term, and it has its a corresponding definition in the terminology now. Please just review it, read it, and bash on it if there is something wrong with that. We have also come to a resolution regarding the term assertion. And assertion is now, at this moment of time, officially a collection result. I hope everybody is okay with that. We need a consensus on this. I can raise a question for consensus on the list, and I will do this. And but please, before you form a elaborate opinion about this, read it first. Also, corresponding we have the collection result as a definition now, and the ongoing question how an internal collector and a collection task align. I'm not sure. This is why collector and internal collector now made it into the terminology a little bit premature, but they are there in order to support discussion on this topic. Also, there was a notion on the email list, and nobody actually was speaking against this. There's the output of a second component is basically a statement about a fact. This is now in the terminology draft, which is okay. Again, please, if you find a good reason why this definition should not be adapted in other drafts, this is specifically targeted at the authors, do so. And taking into account that we have the endpoint design team, now there are two new terms that are the target endpoint identifier, which is a little bit strange name maybe, because it is basically a container that contains the identifying attributes. And then we have a label for that container, because transporting all these attributes all the time with every output or collection result, for example, of a second component could be cumbersome, especially in post-processing second components that evaluate and assess some security posture. So there might be an implicit component here that can label a set of endpoint identifiers that are now in the endpoint identifier container. All of this is somehow related to timestamps. So yeah, statements and collection results and such will have timestamps. Those are now defined in the terminology. Please look at that. Yeah, we have security considerations. This was a topic today. And for example, the second domain typically is, we think at this moment of time, not supposed to assess itself, only the target endpoints. So as a default, one could say that every second component is an excluded endpoint and not a target endpoint, which makes the excluded endpoint the complement to the target endpoint. Optionally, one could say that the second component is not an excluded target, but made explicitly also a target endpoint. That would make the second domain self-assessment. I don't know if there's a term. And there should be discussion on this. It is implicitly there and can be commented on in the terminology draft now. Also, there was a notion that identifying something with IP address is really, really complicated when there are no interfaces associated with them. Because, for example, a IP address does not have to be unique, and maybe interface names make them unique or some topological placement. This discussion comes up again and again on the mail list. So now there are corresponding definitions in the terminology. And next slide, please. How much time do I have left?
10 minutes.
Okay, updates. Yeah, basically I corrected some errors in our broker proxy and repository. I added controller to the mix. Consumer and provider were in, controller wasn't. Now controllers in, and accordingly broker proxy and repository are controller types. I basically made, and this is a personal choice here as an editor, I made the attributes and endpoint attributes a synonym, because I think when we're talking about attributes in SACM, we are probably always talking about endpoint attributes. Also, these are, if not indicated otherwise, AVPs. Yeah, everything else. A control plane made it in again because there was some discussion about what a control plane and a management plane is. This is a very fundamental discussion that is not associated to any draft, but it's this basic terminology. A control plane is now something different than a management plane. There was a version of the draft where this was the same thing. And that's basically concluding the update and report on terminology. And on the next slide, I just want to highlight again that there is some, agreeing on terminology is bi-directional work. So edits to the terminology draft must be reviewed by editors and authors. And also the editor of the terminology draft must read updates to the drafts in order to check if resulting text in the new drafts is somehow consistent. So please read the terminology if you're an author or an editor. This is mandatory. And I'm sorry. And yeah, so the terminology is, of course, a moving document, especially when the new data model proposals on Thursday come in. And yeah, of course, this will result in the next iteration of new and added terms, I suppose. Are there wishes or comments at this point of time, so shortly before the social event? This was to be expected because terminology is, wow, no, actually there's one. Thank you.
Lucy Lynch, and this may be my ignorance on the use of attributes as a term in other work that I do, but I'm wondering why there wouldn't be attributes on the provider side, particularly if an endpoint can select among providers or identify a single provider that they want to use. Wouldn't there also be attributes passed from that side saying what they're authoritative for?
This is falling under guidance at the moment, I think.
Okay.
If I understand you correctly. So collection results basically.
I'm just thinking in terms of the auth and auth-Z
Yeah,
exchanges
I see.
and boxes agreeing to accept things from one another. Is there not an attribute exchange on both sides? I'm confused. So
yeah, as a first, Nancy will come up with a comment on that. But first, let me say that it is in this point of time, in all drafts, attributes is used only in the context of target endpoints. So this is reflecting drafts. If it is changing in the drafts, it will be reflected in the terminology.
Yeah, so we try to make the distinction of, as Henk is saying, attributes go towards the target endpoints. Capabilities go towards attributes of the SACM components, effectively. But we needed to make the distinction.
I understand why this is confusing. Why this is why it is highlighted in the terminology.
Yeah, it's confusing to me because I think there's a risk calculation on both sides, but
So there do not seem to be any more wishes or comments or questions. So this will conclude the update of the terminology draft. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have the day of tomorrow. Whatever time you can spend into making some progress and adjustments and meeting offline, please do it. Because of the lack of time and the different missions, will not give specific homework this time. But I believe that we know all what are the documents and what we expect from each one of those three charter documents to progress. The session on Thursday will be focusing on the solutions. So we'll have the discussions on solutions and on the next steps or the way forward. Any other final comments? Okay, thank you. See you on Thursday. Blue sheets, anybody who did not sign the blue sheet and wants to have a seat in Buenos Aires, please come and sign. Starts at 7, and the lines actually are accessible after 7:30, 7:45. So if you want to stand in line, go early.